Pull my screen off
Lord.
there. Don't do that.
Bye. Just by Michael. And the three of us are left. I have my countdown going. Yeah, let's do that. We'll give hi everybody. We are streaming. We will, as always, give people 1 or 2 minutes to come in and grab a seat and submit your requests for Kevin to play on the piano.
Please don't.
$2.
My son can play much better than me, I'll tell you that. And he's 10.
To be fair, I'm of an age where 10-year-olds are better at most things than I am, so I get it.
Yes.
Yeah, technology, languages, piano, art, yeah. Adulting, I don't know. Oh, fantastic. Hi. Oh, we have Scotland. Hey, Elizabeth. Oh, Southern California. We're getting a big crowd today. Nice. Everybody wants to know about genres. Okay, so I have to say before we get started, I always do the spoiler, but I am going to let Gareth have the spoiler today. If I can stand it, because Gareth is scheduled at the end of our show today. So if I can hold it together throughout the majority of the stream, then Gareth has a big surprise for you. And
is there a spoiler today?
Well, it's something that's happening in October that we haven't announced yet. So, yeah.
Okay. Zip.
It's a preview. We'll call it a preview. Fantastic. All right. Well, I think, what are we? 2 after. How do we feel? We're feeling good. We've got a bunch of people coming into the audience. I think we're ready. Let's kick it off. Hi, everyone. Beth here with AutoCrit, and I have today both Kevin and Gareth.
Hello.
Full house.
And we are going to talk about genres. So, first of all, I would love to hear from the audience what genre you love to, and here's another twist, because, write and read, if those are different, because I absolutely think those could be very different. So, Kevin, what about you? What do you like to write and what do you like to read?
I think I'm more in the science fiction realm, to be honest with you. Obviously you can work in a lot of other elements into those, but I guess the primary genre would be science fiction.
Absolutely. You know what? I agree with that because I've just been in such a sci-fi kick lately.
Is it because of 2020? You feel like you're in another world?
Life right now? You might be right. You might be right. And Gareth, shall we open the door for Gareth to?
My favorite is the old style bodice rippers.
What?
From Mills and Boon.
Wait.
You're killing us, Gareth.
I think everybody who's watched us before knows I'm the horror guy.
Yes, the horror guy. To write, to read, to watch movies, to everything all horror all the time. For Gareth, I love reading sci-fi. I have been on such a and tell me, because I sometimes get my genres crossed, which I know we're going to talk about today, but Brandon Sanderson, Wheel of Time, sci-fi, right?
More epic fantasy.
Epic fantasy. Oh, those are the two because they're so closely related, sci-fi and fantasy, that I kind of am like, so good to know. Good to know. Oh, crime. Okay. Real talk. Crime. True crime. Yes. Like nonfiction crime. Yeah.
There's been I think a whole television studio is built off of that.
There are channels on my television, and I just do rabbit ears, and there are channels.
Nothing else will they show it.
Nothing but unsolved mysteries from the 90s. Okay. Oh, somebody. Okay, that's Christy. Ooh, writes mysteries, reads adventure, regular fiction, and fantasy. Write romance or mystery. Read sci-fi and mystery from Steve. Elizabeth, adventure, mystery, crime, all fiction. Writing a thriller, but enjoy reading all types. I love this. Historical. Oh, I love me some historical fiction, which is just fantastic because the amount of real history and my imagination, I could just go crazy with that.
Well, what's real history anyway? Somebody had to write it down. So I think there's a very fine line between historical fiction and historical
and just history. Yeah. Right. Fantastic. So what is a genre and why is it so important? So strictly speaking, a genre is a style or category of art. And what makes each genre distinct is the particular features or the content that distinguishes them from each other, right? So you've got romance and it's love and it's a journey about people coming together and then going apart and then coming back together, however that's going. And then really being able to distinguish that from a fast-paced thriller, a crime novel, a mystery, whatever. So what makes the genre important in terms of being able to label your work is that that's what really sets the first expectation with your readers. When you look at a book, when Gareth looks at a book and the genre says horror, he has a certain expectation, and depending on the subgenre, he may have yet a finer tuned expectation around death and mystery and suspense and blood and gore and guts and stuff.
Sure. And I have a question for you, Beth. How do you know by picking up a book what genre it could be? How do you typically think?
Like a real book?
Yeah. So somebody handed you a book. How would you guess what genre it would be?
So I'm very visual. So I always I look at the cover. I look at the picture, the cover art, the font that they've used on the cover. Sometimes the colors, you'll see in my bookcase, everything's kind of color coded. So you can tell color choices are big for me. That visual impact. What about you, Kevin?
Well, I think it's the cover. It's got to be the cover art. However they put it there, that really sets the promise and expectation of what the genre could be. And there's certain, I guess, established benchmarks that you usually need to have a man and a woman on a cover for if it's a romance almost all the time. Usually in some sort of an awkward pose.
Sparks, anyone?
So anyway, I'm just curious because it's one of those deals where, especially where your book ends up in the bookshelves and how it looks is extremely important to set the expectation of the genre just based on, like you said, the color of the picture on the front. Unfortunately, you can't judge a book by its cover, but most people do.
You can. Sometimes you can.
Well, I mean, sometimes you should be able to tell the genre by the cover, so that gives the reader that initial impression. What do you think on that, Gareth?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, the cover is your first, the first impression, and I guess it's the thing that people say all the time is you only get one chance to make a first impression, so it had better be good. And when you see that, you see a cover and it sends the signal that this is a romance, or somebody mentioned in the comments there, the font matters. Definitely the font can matter because again, font wise, it can tell you that it's a horror story if it's all jagged and just looks different.
Yeah, this is Philippa Gregory, no surprise coming from my bookshelf, but her font really tells me that this is somewhat historical. It's an older looking font, even for her name. And then the title, very stylized. It's got a look and feel of, a historical fiction. It says it's a novel right on the front, so it's fiction. But the idea that the font really matters can come through loud and clear when you're looking at especially a horror book, to Garrett's point, or a romance book, to have two people on the cover, one with a dress and ripping bodices, just like Gareth loves. But really, Nicholas Sparks is the quintessential master of, literally everybody knows when they pick up a Nicholas Sparks book, because it's always got, a man and a woman in the rain kissing. That's every one of his covers.
Every single one.
Every single one. Hey, you know what? If it works, don't, what's it called? If it's not broken, don't fix it. Did I just mess that up?
Maybe.
No. If it's Whatever works. Stick with it. Stick with what works. So definitely when you're thinking about your book and what genre you're writing in, be aware of things like your cover art. And I've seen a lot of folks in our community sharing cover art for their books, cover art ideas. And, they get lots of feedback on the font and the color schemes and, what you're trying to convey with that cover can really come across. And I will do a quick plug for our AutoCrit anthology.
Because great.
If you look closely at this, it's truly, this is a map of the world, and you can see the dots kind of connecting everybody worldwide. And we had submissions from all over the world that were presented in that trophy anthology. So let's go back to the genre specific topics. So expectations are definitely set with your cover, with your spine, with everything that you're saying right up front. And when you realize what genre you're in, there are reader expectations around that we mentioned earlier. So AutoCrit really has become aware, and we've built it to be really aware of some of the nuances within those genre, whether it's the power words that you're using, whether it's the emotional overtones and undertones. In the end, it's really to help you craft something that readers can really just slip right into and be recognizable based on those unconscious expectations that, when you pick up a book with a scary cover, you don't expect it to be a gentle, romance or a smooth, history. So Kevin is here to show us exactly how that reveals itself inside of AutoCrit. But before that, when we were talking about genres, Roxanne St. Clair wrote a tremendous article for us, and I've got a little banner. I'm going to just pop that up real quick about the mid-list, potential benefits of genre hopping and how that can be a good thing or a bad thing. But if you haven't heard the term mid-list, it's kind of that no man's land in a publishing house where you're not a newbie, but you're also not chart-topping household name. So you're kind of in that mid-list, if you will, right? You're getting by. You're solid in their catalog. You're just maybe not yet their star player.
Yep.
So you can get really frustrated, stuck there. But Kevin, talk about kind of some ways to get out of that.
Well, mid-list. The worst thing that could happen is especially from a publishing house standpoint, is to be stagnant with your career. Either you're on the rise, you're on the fall, you're trying something different, but just doing exactly the same thing. By default, the publishers are going to kind of get, you only sold X number of books last time. They're only going to order this many the next time. So they, by default, by staying exactly where you're at, your essence falling. You always have to be showing some sort of movement, some sort of trend, have some momentum, I guess you could say, with your publishing career. So one of the ways to do it is to dip your toe into another genre. If you have the aptitude for it, obviously we're going to go through some of the different skill sets you might need to have in order to pull that off. But it's a good way to, I guess, open yourself up to a new audience and also open yourself up to your own writing styles. And as far as like grow as a writer itself and maybe create something you didn't know you had in the past by trying something different. So it's definitely something that I think you should try, but obviously wade into it because there's definite pitfalls associated with trying something, especially when you're going to switch a severe genre change from one extreme to another. I don't recommend that. Maybe kind of eddy into some of the subgenres or kind of bring some elements in something else. Don't go too far away from your core, but also don't be afraid to try something new at all to keep your writing career moving, doing something.
Right. Always keep it fresh and keep it exciting for your readers. Now, a couple of different points of view on that. It might be a tremendous time to have a pseudonym, right? Yeah. If you're hardcore horror like Gareth and you want to try your hand at romance, it may not translate well. So write it under a pseudonym.
Yep.
It absolutely could be the ticket. Your publisher may not want you to dilute your brand if you're already well known in a certain genre, or if you really have a maybe not huge but rabid and dedicated fan base in a certain genre, you don't want to dilute that. So maybe write it under a pseudonym.
That's a tricky thing too, because I think J.K. Rowling was famous for trying to write another type of story under a pseudonym, and she got rejected over and over again under that other name because they didn't realize it was her. So you got to be awfully careful about rejecting the audience that you do have, because there's nothing better than having a list already there in place, right? So don't. Yeah, I'm not saying if that's why this is a tricky thing where like maybe you're stepping on lily pads. You can easily fall in. You got to be step delicately and if you do try to write under a completely new name and try to create a new persona, don't be surprised if you have to once again have growing pains in that other genre as well.
Yeah, there is the opportunity taking that approach with. Like Stephen King wrote under Richard Bachman or Bachman, however you pronounce that. But the one thing that can be done is if you already have a really rabid fan base of your own, is telling them that this is me.
Right?
I just write under this other name as a differentiator, so it doesn't water down my core brand.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. I think having a pseudonym and writing under different personas so interesting, because there is always that tension of, do I let them know? Is it better to not? Do I me, I love a big surprise, mostly giving it away, but having that idea that I could be two different people and nobody would really know, and then have this big reveal, it really appeals to me. But it is, as Kevin mentioned, a lot of work. If you are well known for a certain genre, and building a second fan base in a completely different genre may be difficult. Now, if they're closely related, perhaps perhaps that's easier. The other thing I think Kevin's going to tell us a little bit more about is the idea that you don't necessarily have to switch genres into a totally different book, right? So that idea of a pivot inside one book from one genre to another. Tell us a little bit about that, Kevin.
So I think a lot of people know about the plot twist, right? They've known, this is, I need a twist. I need something exciting, interesting. I've come across quite a bit lately where somebody tries to do a genre twist, where it's like an extreme plot twist where, further down the line, you actually bring in an element of another genre totally just to try to add a twist to your story. It can be done extremely well. And it can be done extremely poorly as well, because as what Beth mentioned to start, the genre obviously is an expectation, but I like to also consider it like a promise, right? You're promising your reader something, and if you totally break the overarching genre, I'm not saying you shouldn't have subgenres inside but if you have your overarching, plot and structure is built off of a main genre, and then you switch it, it can also break that promise to your reader, and it can be, could kill your book. People put it down, they get upset, they have a very dissatisfied ending if at the very end there's an alien that comes out of the spaceship and steals your procrastinating, your protagonist. There's no aliens anywhere. So there's ways to do it though, and it's some really, really good stories that have had it done well, and some that have done poorly. But typically when it's done well, you set the reader's expectation in the first chapter, maybe the first 3 chapters, if it's a longer work, that there's something odd or unusual, or there's some foreshadowing that maybe there's something science, sci-fi-ish or horror-ish. Something's not right about this character that he's going to turn into something later, versus just having him turn into a werewolf in chapter 15 in this 18-chapter book. And it's like, what the heck? What's going on? I seriously, I was reading a book, and it was one where they were trying to find, and it was like a real adventure story. And they found an unusual object underneath a mountain, and it was all about science, adventure, trying to dive in caves and stuff. And it turns out that aliens came out of this object and killed them all in the end. I'm like, what the heck? It was no mention of an alien whatsoever in the entire book, and then all of a sudden there was aliens crawling out of this thing, and it was really poorly written. The sci-fi part of it was terrible with the details and the world. But it was just like, you did it. You added the twist in the end, and you didn't do it very well. So there's that example. Then there's also the other example, maybe like I don't know, the Hound of the Baskervilles, that old Sherlock Holmes classic, where there is an automatic element of a little bit of magic and mysticism, and what is this hound? Is it a horror story? There's some foreshadowing up front, and you're thinking the whole time, Sherlock Holmes is going to prove that there's no such thing as the Hound of the Baskervilles, and in the end, the twist was there actually was a hound. It was just, painted with some sort of, if I remember correctly, some sort of effervescent paint that glowed, right? Spoiler, sorry, but Sherlock Holmes. Yeah, it's like 100 years old, right? So, but the twist, there was an element of another genre. Sure, it was a mystery, Sherlock Holmes type book, but it had a subgenre in it, and it held true to it the whole way. And the twist wasn't actually that it switched genres, but that it was actually true. In the end, you thought the whole time that he was going to prove it false, as part of amongst all the other, the mystery things that go on with Sherlock Holmes. But anyway, that was kind of one of those interesting elements where you can bring in other genres, but make it up front. Make your reader base aware up front in the first. I love to say in the first chapter or 3 that something's going on here.
Do a little bit of foreshadowing, right?
Yes.
Not a lot, but
then the promise is made up front. Okay, this is a little bit different romance than I'm used to. There's something a little bit odd here. There's something off. Don't sprint. I hate. Some people are always looking for a twist in their novel to try to. I got to make this interesting. I'm going to change the plot or change the genre real quick, and there's going to be. I want to add a vampire to the story. It'll definitely be more interesting. Then be very, very careful with that. Unless your whole story is going to be built in that fashion, you're going to try to weave it in. Don't just try to weave it in later on down the line. Otherwise, I always err on staying true to your genre as much as possible and have a satisfying book versus having a surprising book, which is like 9 times out of 10 is going to fail on you. And you're going to have a dissatisfied reader in the end, and that's not what you want. So I always end for a satisfaction rather than a surprise, perhaps. And there's probably a million, maybe not a million, but there's probably a lot of examples that they were able to pull it off. But if you're not confident in it and you don't do it well,
it's difficult.
It's not easy to do, right, Gareth? I mean, in the horror genre, that's probably a classic where people try to all of a sudden add a little bit of element of horror into it at the wrong moment. It's very difficult to pull off.
Yeah, there's one that's particularly famous. I believe it is adapted from a book. This is a movie directed by Takashi Miike called Audition, and I believe it is adapted from a Japanese novel. And it's one of these examples where I would say, it's a super brave move, but pulled off spectacularly well. Where literally the first 2/3 of the movie are essentially a romantic comedy. It's presented entirely in that manner, and then everything goes south real fast, real hard, and it's pretty much it's world famous now simply because of how shocking it is.
Sure,
it really does it well.
Audition,
yeah. So like Gareth said, when you do it well, your book could just be like, wow, this is amazing, but you better do it well.
Boy, yeah. That's a tough one. That's a tough one. Yeah, maybe we do a regular twist and then build up to a genre bending sort of twist. Yeah, perfect. Absolutely. I just, the whole time we're having this conversation, I keep thinking, gosh, can you imagine a Lonesome Dove Louis L'Amour fan picking up something that just all of a sudden they're aliens or there's, sci-fi qualities? I feel like that those would be pretty dissatisfied readers.
Sure.
So Kevin, let's what do you say? Let's jump into AutoCrit?
Oh, sure. So what AutoCrit does, because as we mentioned, each genre has their own tendencies. Oops.
Oh, wow. There it is. Okay.
Hold on. No. We're good now. We don't want to go into that black hole.
We just got into sci-fi.
So as we mentioned, AutoCrit is looked at lots of different genres. And the reason why we did that, because each genre has its own peculiarities, especially with word usage, even something as simple as sentence length and pacings. And, everyone has a little bit different style, and each genre has their own style as well. So what we've done is we've opened up the analysis here to allow you to change that genre. So what you're actually comparing to when you're inside of AutoCrit, if you're not familiar with it, you're putting your text in, you're comparing it to established published fiction. So in this case, you can actually pick what genre you want to compare to, which is really important because we found that each genre is unique, right? That's what we just talked about, how different it is, how a fantasy is different than an epic fantasy would be different from a pacing standpoint than, say, your crime noir genre, which is maybe really, really fast paced. So we've gone ahead and on AutoCrit and given you the option to compare to all the different types of genres, well, not all of them, but the main categories that we've found. And as we dove in, as we mentioned earlier, there's a lot of subgenres, and we found that instead of trying to catch all the subgenres, because I can't remember what on Amazon how many there are, but there's hundreds of them, right? You'd go crazy trying to figure out what kind of genre you could do. So instead of that, we decided to go with certain well-known authors that have basically almost created the genre of their own. They've printed enough, they've published enough that they've really become their own. Maybe like a planet. They have their own gravity, right? They have their own. They've established a brand so powerful that it basically is a genre.
Absolutely. Brenda Jackson is right there on your screen, was a terrific example, an incredibly prolific romance author with her very own distinct style. So within AutoCrit, if you're not just a romance author, but a fan of Brenda Jackson as kind of an inspiration, terrific way to compare your writing to her specific style. And I think we have like Danielle Steele in there as well, who has
Danielle Steele, Dan Simmons, Dean Koontz. We've tried to pick some of the the pillars of the writing world over the we try to keep it somewhat recent. We don't want to go back too far. We're not going to try to, because we're obviously doing something more current, but definitely the pillars of the current established writing. George Martin, Graham Hancock. These are, we pulled from the most popular, the people that sold the most books. Really, that's what it amounts to. To a certain extent, they've have some sort of secret or success that they've derived in their writing style that they've basically, like I said, created their own genre in its own. So what I've done here to take a good example of how AutoCrit can deal with that, I've taken a book by Rick Riordan, a Percy Jackson one. I've never read it.
I love Percy Jackson.
So I came out of the blue. I'm like, haven't read this. I'm somewhat familiar with it, but once again, when I know we have them in our system, and I looked at the cover. I'm like, you know what? This is going to be a young adult sci-fi fantasy. Basically fantasy. Just like jumped out at me. Like, you pretty much know exactly what you're going to get when you see this.
It's a great example of the cover really setting your expectations.
Yep. So as soon as I'm going to go in this blind and see how AutoCrit reacts to it, and how it give you an example to the audience here as far as what does it really matter to compare to different genres inside our system. So I ran it against general fiction, and I came up with a score of 7901, which is pretty decent. This is if you're not familiar with the overall score, this compares all the different highlights and things that AutoCrit will find inside your text, and it'll give you it related to the overall number of words that are present. So it's just kind of like an overall, like a benchmark to get started from when you're editing inside our system. So right now we started at a 79. I switched the genre from general fiction. I switched to sci-fi fantasy, and it only went up 0.5. So I'm like, I didn't go very far. And a lot of our users who are more familiar with it say, wow, you really should change more than that. But in essence, what it's saying is that this story is kind of written more in a general fashion. It doesn't really have that strong of a fantasy pull to it, but it is obviously somewhat better, but it's not like an extreme example. And also, when you think about this is looking at all the things that AutoCrit finds. The real beauty of what AutoCrit does is it doesn't just look at the global thing. We also dive down to the specific word itself. So this is kind of where the interesting thing really comes up. And when you start getting away from looking at the overall score and you start diving into a specific category and seeing how that changes as you switch your genre here to compare it to. So I chose generic descriptions. And I picked something that was totally opposite from our list of options. I chose newspaper. So there's nothing, this is not a newspaper, right? This is nothing, that nonfiction style. This is like a young adult fantasy, like we mentioned. So we found under generic descriptions, just looking at, you can go through all of them, but we have an excess, remove 263. Basically, what AutoCrit has found is you've used way too many when you compare this work, these words to something that was written in the newspaper style. You're not doing so well with regard to your generic descriptions. You got to remove quite a few of them. Then I decided, well, let's drive down now and look at what it would be if I was science fiction fantasy. It went from recommendation of 263 to remove. Now we're looking at only 139. I ran that same thing. So now I'm driving it. Okay, that's about half. And then I want to drive it down. Let's look at young adult.
Oh.
Now we're at 91. So we're getting closer and closer to a writing style that this Rick Riordan was trying to emulate when he put that together. And then just for the fun of it, I said, well, let's take a look at what it would be when we compare it to himself, because we do have Rick Riordan in our system. So now we're actually comparing to Rick Riordan. We see, well, only remove 12, right? So we went from comparing to something that we weren't even close to, newspaper, removing 263 of these type of words in this case. Now when we drive down to comparing it to himself, only remove 12. So it's a big change.
That's huge. And I love when we compare authors to themselves, because it really shows how consistent they are across their entire body of work, or perhaps how they've evolved over time. So that's really interesting.
So it's not like I said, maybe the overall score didn't change much, like, because it's especially when you have a large amount of words. This is a full novel here, so sometimes you have a difficult time moving the overall score because we look at so much stuff. But the really important thing is, don't just look at the overall score, but dive down into the specific categories, and that's where really the beauty of comparing to a different genre can kind of make a big difference to you when you're trying to get these individual reports, and that kind of has an impact on what you will or will not edit, per se, if you're trying to achieve, in this case, he's comparing to himself, so he's not doing too bad. And just to prove that this is the case, I also looked at, showing versus telling. I compared just to our generic overall academic genre, and we had to remove 1285 in these indicators, right? Wow. And then I look at, I switch it over to sci-fi fantasy, and it's good. No problem.
I mean, right? That is so on target, though, because academically we want to be clear. We want the facts and nothing but the facts.
Yep.
And in fiction writing, it's quite the opposite, especially in sci-fi. We want to describe and let the reader get immersed in the story and take their own imagination to the next level, where in academics, you don't want anybody to have, I don't want to say you don't want to have any imagination, but it's, it's fact driven. It's educational. You want them to take in these facts as they are, not add their own, imaginative embellishments. So I just love how clearly that's illustrated here. Exactly.
So, and that's another one of the case that if you had just gone to the overall score and said, oh, there's no difference between the two, well, you're really missing the detail. And the devil's usually in the details with stuff like this, about how we go down to individual word level and individual category level with these comparisons. So it's really, it behooves you, if you're going to pick something to compare against, pick one and stick with it, and then dive into some of the details with it as well.
And so ultimately makes the whole process easier for you when you can drill down like that, because, well, as we see here with Rick Riordan, if this was your book and you were trying to edit it against an academic setting, you're kind of trying to ice skate uphill there. Yep. It's not the right way to go, and we can let you dial in on that and get it right.
Yep, save you some time. Really, well, you try to achieve your goal too, right? That's the whole point of using a tool like AutoCrit. Is it's a tool. It's supposed to help you make things quicker, faster, and easier when you do it. That's the whole point here, is to give you an insight to help you edit to achieve your writing goals. So that's really what we're going for. So really handy tool using the genre comparison here. And also, in addition to looking at the individual categories, I always think it's fun too. We also have personal words and phrases, where you can add any word you want, and it will show you how many times you've used it as compared to another author or another genre. The same way you can change your genre. But in this case, because I know this was a fantasy book, it had the word magic in it, right? I figured, well, the magic's going to show up in here. So if I compare this to Daniel Silva, who is not a fantasy author, he's more of a action Lee Child, Jack Reacher style, just adventure drama, and he doesn't use the word magic hardly at all. So I figured, well, let's check it. And sure enough, if I change that, and then I look at, it's way to go. Perfect when I switch it back to Rick Riordan, when he compares it to himself, he's just fine because he uses the word a lot. So it's always helpful when you're doing your editing, not only to be comparing yourself to general fiction, but also pick a genre. Give it a shot. I think it's going to help you out with making some of these recommendations make more sense and maybe be more relevant, perhaps, to what it is you're trying to achieve there with your editing goals and what kind of words you're using, and kind of, once again, setting that expectation, that promise of your genre that you've chosen to write in, to make it make sense. And also, as we mentioned too, if you're going to switch genres, you're going to try to write a little bit different style, perhaps. Using something like AutoCrit is a great way to see if you're hitting the mark. is my word choice, appropriate? Is this working? From what somebody will expect to see. So it's really fun and handy to have, especially when you're trying to weave in different genres and or writing something a little bit new. So highly recommend doing that.
Love that.
It's all about those expectations.
Absolutely. I will say specific genre comparison and author comparison are professional level features within AutoCrit. So if you're a free forever member, you won't yet have access to that, but you can get a fully featured trial of our professional edition for $1 for 14 days. Just follow this link, autocrit.com/DDL for Deep Dive Live. Anybody who's out there just on a free forever membership, check out the professional trial and dig into some of the more specific genre and author comparisons and really see where AutoCrit shines. So just wanted to put that up for us. Great. And speaking of genres and speaking of spoilers that I alluded to earlier, let's throw it over to Gareth. And
that's where I get to geek out.
Yeah, see what he's got.
I jumped off too soon.
I didn't take you out of there. That's
I was like, I switched off my screen.
I would time continuum.
I would say to everybody watching as well, check out that article that Roxanne wrote. There's loads of tips and things in there, and just things to look out for. In that area of the blog, we have tons and tons of content, like literally written by best-selling authors to help guide you through. So spend some time there. But okay, geek time. Speaking of genres, October is knocking on the door, and you know what October means? Halloween. So we are lightly announcing today that we are adding the horror genre mid-October to AutoCrit. There'll also be coming along with that a selection of some huge names that will be individual authors, like you saw there with Dean Koontz. We've got a lot more, and they're coming in. We're going to take a deeper look at that in next week's stream. So we'll reveal some of the names there and check some of the books live and see how that goes. But since we've been talking about sort of genre hopping and everything, even more exciting, if you are thinking about, stepping outside the box and giving horror a try, you may have already seen that we're running our Nightmare Fuel course. It starts from Monday. That's a 4-week long thing where the three of us will be there in the Wet Ink platform is what it's called, where you can write and access the course.
Yep.
We'll
be there to chat. Yeah, there's live streams every week. So everything you need in there. It's even though it's 4 weeks long, it's still kind of a fast-paced course. So I don't think you'll be bored at any point, because there's plenty of activities and things that you can do. You can write inside Wet Ink and share your work with other attendees. People can, give you feedback and drop notes on what you're writing. So if you think that you might want to just jump over and give a horror story a try for October, get on it.
Good.
I think Beth will post a link there. But
I will post a link in the comments to the additional information on the horror course.
We have, as part of it, we went around and reached out to some, really, really great authors. And we got personal feedback from them with their own individual tips. People including, we've got Ramsey Campbell, Graham Masterton.
Graham Masterton is so creepy, by the way.
I've read him my entire life.
And it shows, Gareth.
We have Tim Curran, Greg Beck. All these guys gave us really great tips that are part of the course there. And we have also just locked in Geoff Brown, my favorite Australian. He is the owner, editor, publisher with Cohesion Press in Australia. If you're not familiar with Cohesion Press, they print a anthology series called Snafu, which is all like military-based horror with different themes in each anthology. And if you haven't seen it, look it up. There's a series on Netflix called Love, Death, Robots, and I think it was about half of the stories that are adapted in that show are from Cohesion Press's books. So Geoff is going to be joining us for a live stream. He'll be answering questions, taking you through there, and I have it on good authority that starting, it's either late October or November, cohesion are opening up for submissions for the next snafu. So
Ooh.
keep that in mind. If you
Mhm.
do decide to go for it, look up the website and just make sure you actually check the submission guidelines, because Geoff will lose his mind if the guidelines aren't followed. But yeah, he's going to be part of that. So fantastic guest lined up for the course.
Perfect.
It's all interactive and everything, so we're looking forward to it.
Yeah,
and,
I'm super
it sounds
excited
interesting.
about it. I'm super
along.
excited about that wedding program to try to use it for our group here and get some collaboration going on, some beta reading style, some comments. It's really interactive.
Yeah.
It's going to be a course like probably you've never been in part of, so it's almost like a writing group too. It's going to be amazing.
It's Wedding as a platform was designed to teach writing. So it has some of those great features built in around beta reading and feedback and mandatory reviews. And it's just going to be amazing. We've got,
it's almost like a combination course and
yeah,
workshop.
we're really excited. I mean, if you can't tell, we're very excited.
Well, this is a perfect way to do it, right? You want to try your hand in a new genre, or maybe you're already a horror expert and you want to learn some new. So it's a great thing
to
for
write something.
Yeah.
I think the easy link we have for it is just autocrit.com/nightmare. So if that sounds fun, just pop that in when you're off this stream, have a look, and we'll hopefully see you there.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. Okay. We've covered a lot today. We covered genres, genre hopping. We've got big announcements around adding horror as its own genre in October. And of course, our upcoming horror course, Nightmare Fuel. I think you may see in my background some Viking helmets.
It's coming. I feel it.
You're in the know about, I'll grab my favorite one. If you're in the know about such things as Viking helmets, this may give you a clue that we are officially a major sponsor of NaNoWriMo this year. So we're very, very excited about that. You'll be seeing a lot of us in Viking helmets. We did go ahead and set up a separate group for that. So we have a group in Facebook that is specifically dedicated to the AutoCrit NaNoWriMo experience. So if you just can't get enough of nano type activities, we're going to have live streams, author interviews. I'm reading a lot right now of specific authors because we have so many authors lined up for live stream interviews. And these are authors that have been through Nano before. They have published their novels based on their work from Nano. So I think it's going to be really inspirational. And we've been brainstorming a ton of really fun things to do as well.
Mm-hmm.
So
it's supposed to be fun, right? That's the whole point.
It's supposed to be fun, right?
It's going to be crazy.
Yeah, it is going to be crazy. So much going on here at AutoCrit. Phew, I feel like we can connect it today because, God, save something for our next live stream.
Yes, please.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, thank you everyone for sticking with us today. It was great to virtually see you, and we will see you again soon.
Thanks,
Bye.
everybody.
Bye.